In the previous episode, I introduced you to Rudolph and Albertina Jacobi, who settled in Maryborough and had 8 children. Now let's just stop for a second. Do you think Rudolph looks a little bit like the Ned Kelly gang? Anyway, they had 8 children, and the second youngest was born on the 7th of April 1890, named Richard Conrad Jacobi, who would become my great-grandfather.
Our ancestors are more than names on paper. They are the interesting stories that shows us lives once lived, from cows to sugarcane, from convicts to the Anzacs. This is my journey. Come along with me, discovering stories of ancestry, facts, and life. My story worth living.
Thanks for joining me again today. Today I'm at a heritage village just to have a look at how life would have been different back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and just to put in perspective how some of my rallies, and more than likely your rallies, used to live. So let me introduce you to Richard and Rose Jacobi. So I spoke about Richard before. He was born in 1890. But sadly, by the time he was age 6, there's some discrepancy in age. However, we follow the ancestry.com.au ages. He was around 6. Doesn't matter, but both of his parents had passed away, so he was left an orphan. The Heicher family in Maryborough, which was another German family, fostered him for the time being, which was awesome, so he could still grow up in the area and with a German family, so he could learn the language a little bit more. Now around the same time, Richard contracted diphtheria. Now diphtheria was a serious infection of the mouth and throat, so severe that it would inflame all of the airways and could suffocate a child, or an adult for that matter. It was just such a chronic illness. Luckily today we have vaccinations that prevent it, but in 1896 there was nothing of that sort. Anyway, Richard was very ill, and thankfully Dr. Legras from Maryborough Hospital came out and did a tracheotomy on his throat, and that relieved his airway so he could breathe. Pretty much saved his life. An amazing feat in 1896 to be able to perform that sort of surgery. During Richard's teenage years, he was a cane cutter. Now, in Childers especially, but that's where the CSR factory was formed in 1894, they were producing raw sugar and cane juice. Now, Childers, Maryborough, Bundaberg were fertile soil areas for the sugarcane growers, and there was a multitude of cane cutters, cane growers. Actually, my maternal grandfather was a cane cutter, well I should say my adopted one, but he was a cane cutter too, and it was hard work. They used to burn the cane off to get rid of all the vermin, the excess grass and whatnot. It was amazing. But yeah, Richard was a cane cutter, and that's where he was in Childers, and not long after is where he met Rose. So who was Rose Croswell? She was born on the 25th of June 1892 to Charles and Anne Croswell. Her parents were farmers, and most likely livestock farmers. That's what the records show that Dallarnil was quite profitable for, was livestock. Now Rose was the 10th child born with 11 siblings. Can you imagine having that many siblings? I had one. I had 3 children. Like, that was plenty, let alone having 11 or 12 kids running around and trying to remember their names. But anyway, we'll talk about Charles and Anne a bit later. Rose Croswell attended the Dallarnil Provisional School in 1901. It stayed a provisional school until 1909 when it became a state school. Now have a look at what I've just found. All the corporate punishment, which was terrible, for getting your sums wrong, your spellings wrong, having messy work. Check it out. So this is Dallarnil State School, 26th of February 1901, Miss Clary Rose Croswell. She was 8, born in June. Her family were farmers. So she was in the first year that she got to come to the new school. What else do we have here? Oh wow. So this is the register of corporal punishment in the Dallarnil school. Alright, so this one is 1901, the very first year it was open. Let's have a look. Rose Croswell. Did not know her spelling. 2 strikes on the hand. Well, that's pretty harsh. Thomas Croswell must have been her brother for disobedience. Wow. To 1902 and 1903. Let's have a look. Croswell again, look at this. Rose Croswell, talking in school. 2 strokes on the hand. And her brother again getting in trouble. Gee, they were very harsh, weren't they? Beautiful horses behind me. Now it says that Richard would ride a horse 32 kilometres from Childers to Dallarnil just to visit Rose when he was dating her. Well, it actually says courting, but that actually means dating. Could you imagine riding 32 kilometres on a horse just one way to date your future partner? It's amazing. And now, one hint. So, Richard and Rose were married on the 28th of October 1911. It wasn't this church, but it's pretty beautiful, hey? Check it out. Richard and Rose had a total of 9 children. They had 4 born in Childers. Tragically, 2 were stillborn. And then they had another 5 in Bigoton. Now, Bigoton is only 14 kilometres south of Dallarnil. Anyway, let's get back to the 3rd child born in Childers. Turns out to be my grandfather, William Charles Jacobi. Now, as the story goes, Richard built a house in Dallarnil behind the cemetery. However, it was not on his own property. So he was not only turfed out of the home he built with his wife and 2 children, but also off the land. Now, the story goes that Richard carried a treadle sewing machine on his back, driving a cow, with Rose with 1 child in her arms and the other following beside her on the land. And as they were walking back, Rose's parents, Charles and Anne, they spotted them and they gave them 50 acres of land, which became known as the 50-acre place. Anyway, so then Richard and Anne lived in a barn for quite a while that was on the property with their children. And then after a little while, he built another home, so he must have been a clever carpenter. Anyway, then they had all their other children and they bought another 160 acres just up a steep hill from the 50-acre place. And that's where they did their dairy farms as well as orchards, and Richard loved to grow gladioli and dahlias. Now take a look, I'll show you a whole heap of photos of their property that I've been able to find. Rose passed away at the age of 67 in 1960, and then Richard lived till he was 93 and passed away at 1984. Thanks for joining me on this historic journey. I'll see you next time.